This episode is sponsored by Shopify. The new year is the perfect time to start your new business. And from creating your brand to getting your first sale, Shopify is there to help you at every step of the way. You can get your store up and running fast with thousands of customizable templates. No coding or design skills required. And Shopify's powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels. So wherever people are scrolling, you can be selling. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase, and start selling with Shopify today. That's shopify.com/TCZ.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
And I'm Jimmy Wong, everybody.
And today we are talking about one of the most difficult elements of Commander gameplay. It's threat assessment, and you're bad at it.
If you're not bad at it, you could be better at it. It's a very difficult part about playing Commander. Even just 1v1 threat assessment can be difficult. Now imagine 3 other players with cards you've never seen from Universes Beyond or Streets of New Capenna smacking you down, and you have no idea what they do. The text is different, and everyone's screaming at each other because something else is the biggest threat at the table, and you don't actually know what to do.
Today, we are going to break down some of those moments in a very general way and give you some questions and some things to think about when you're making those big decisions in a Commander game. But before we get into that, we've got to talk about our sponsors. You can support the show by using affiliate links over at cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of singles and sealed product. You can get all of the cards you're looking for from past sets, future sets, if you're looking at sealed products.
Final Fantasy's coming up.
I mean, in like 6 months.
Okay, it's coming up. I'm excited for it.
But there's a lot of different cards that you can get all in one place, and you can always trust that Card Kingdom knows how to ship their cards professionally and safely. So the cards that you order on the website are the ones that arrive on your doorstep. They put them in a little plastic case with a little packing peanut. Keep them safe and not rattling around, and they don't show up on your doorstep bent.
Ding dong.
Sad.
Sad.
Card Kingdom's the best. If something does go wrong, they've got a team to take care of you as well. So support the show and pick up some sweet cards at cardkingdom.com/command.
And when you get those cards, protect those cards. Put them in binders or sleeves or deck boxes. ultrapro.com/command is our affiliate link for Ultra Pro, and they have all of the game accessories that you need to make your Magic play area look awesome. The playmats we have in front of us, the playmats we use every single day as desk mats or mouse pads, or the deck boxes that are so sturdy that we used to take with us to MagicCons that we trust our own collections to. We can't say anything more about that in terms of how important that is. And you can trust your collections to Ultra Pro as well. They've been in the business for decades now, and they've got great new technology all the time. Their Apex sleeves, their new Mana 8 line. Check it all out on their website, and they also have great deals going on all the time as well. They're probably going to have some New Year's stuff after the holiday rush. So if you sign for their newsletter, you will always be on top of that. Again, that's ultrapro.com/command.
If you're a fan of the recorded show Game Nights, well, you should check out Game Nights Live. We are going to be at MagicCon Chicago.
Tri-City.
Performing on Friday night. We've got a different time slot this time around. We're at 6 p.m.
Yes.
And we're not going to be on the main floor. Ooh. We're going to be in a separate theater, which means we have more space for people to see, a little bit comfier seats for everybody to sit in, and hopefully we'll have everybody sitting in chairs this time around as well.
Yeah, that's February 21st of MagicCon Chicago. It will be at 6 p.m. Chicago time. Now, this is different in that you don't need a separate ticket to go like what we have for a show in Gen Con. You can just use your MagicCon badge. So if you have a Friday badge or a weekend badge, bring your badge with you to the venue. We'll provide all of the details of the venue as we get closer to the show, both on here on the podcast, in our Twitter, our Instagram, as many places as we can. We're doing this so that we have a larger venue, more space for people to sit. A lot of times we have standing room only. And also this means that you can enjoy the full con without having to queue up and wait for a long time and just sit at the panel area. So again, separate venue, February 21st, 6 p.m. You only need your badge to get in.
Different time, same cool show.
Yeah, and it's much bigger, so we expect there to be a lot of space for everyone that wants to come attend.
Absolutely. And if you can't make it to MagicCon, but you still want to support the show, go to patreon.com/command-zone and become a patron. We shout out one lucky patron every single podcast episode, and this one is dedicated to Max Tannenbaum. Max, you're the bomb.
You are the bomb. You rock. Okay, main topic. Who is the threat And why is it Josh Lee Kwai?
This is a very contentious question. I feel like at the end of every Commander game, you look around and go like, I really should have removed that.
Yep, I let that Beast Whisperer stay around for one turn too many, and that's what caused the game to eventually blow over.
Or just like I sent a bunch of my attack power at this player when I really should have been focusing at this player. And those are all mistakes or misevaluations in threat assessment. Figuring out who the problem at the table is when is very difficult when there's 4 people at the table.
Yeah, it's not an easy topic to cover because there's so many elements and aspects to it in every single game, both from who is the better player or who is the player with the most cards versus what's the cards on the tables, right? So we're going to break it down into a more general way, sort of questions you can ask yourself at any given moment, and also just general things that we look out for, some personal experience tales as we dive down into this little rabbit hole. Okay.
Yeah.
Threat assessment.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get into it.
Threat assessment starts before the game even begins.
Before you're even born sometimes.
After, importantly, you've all chosen your decks.
Yeah.
So you should have a pregame conversation to get at decks that balance at the table, and everyone's chosen their decks and you're mulliganing. And now you can start looking around the table and deciding what your relationship is to each of your opponent's decks.
Yeah. And the first thing is also, what is your deck at? So let's say everyone's like, all right, I'm going to play sort of a battlecruiser type game, and they bring out decks that are slightly slower. You can evaluate your own deck first, because it may be that your deck is way faster than everyone else's, or your deck is even slower than the other decks at the table, or maybe you chose your deck to actually do better against the other players at the table. But the main thing is like, what is my deck good at? And specifically, we never ask this, but what is my deck bad at?
Yeah. For example, if you're a Voltron strategy, you're very weak to sacrifice effects. So maybe you'd keep an eye on the Aristocrat deck at the table.
Yeah.
If you're a burn deck and you look around and there's a life gain deck at the table, then you know who to be worried about and what pieces to prepare for. All of that is going to inform how you mulligan, what things you're looking for in your hand, and what players you focus down at different points in the game. Knowing who is going to be the most difficult for you to defeat pays a lot of dividends when you're trying to do some threat assessment.
Yeah, and sometimes, player skill has nothing to do with it. It could just be that they put down a single card, or an edict effect over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter if they're the best player or the worst player in the world. Your deck is just toast to it. Mm-hmm. So understanding that what your opponents are good and bad at, and then comparing that to yours, is just a great general. Don't get too into the nitty gritty, but just look around the table and kind of like Rachel said, like, what are the big questions? Oh, life gain versus burn. Easy to understand that I'm naturally going to be a little weaker against that strategy.
Yeah, at this point, you know your opponent's commanders, so you can get a sense for what their deck is trying to do. You think they're going to win through damage, you think they're going to win through combat, or maybe they have a more controlling strategy, they're a blink strategy or a life gain strategy. Then you have different understandings of how those decks are going to work just by looking at their commander.
Yeah, and understanding how long it is that their game is going to take for them to win. Mm-hmm. Some games last 5 turns, some games last 15. So understanding, are we playing a longer game in general or a shorter game will also help you, because I think the mulligan and your opening hand is one of the biggest things that this is going to affect. I think players in general don't think about other players at the table when they look at an opening hand. They go, this is perfect. I get to do what I want to do. But if your opponent has a turn 1 Rogue Rack or a Yoshimaru and you don't have anything to block in the first few turns, you might find yourself down 15 to 20 life before you even get going. And then all of a sudden your master plan has no weight because you just don't have the life total to support it.
Yeah, sometimes your opponent has a must-kill commander or a very impactful early explosive strategy, and you need to look for some kind of way to interrupt that plan. Mm-hmm. We did a whole episode on commanders that are scary to play against, and we talk about how fast you have to deal with certain commanders. Yep. And I think watching that episode will give you a good idea for like the scariest ones to look at and the different kinds of clocks that you can expect from different kinds of commanders. Yeah,
so that's going to change the opening hand you keep. I know for a fact that I've mulliganed great opening hands away just to have a 1-drop or a 2-drop creature. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to combat, that first combat's so important. If you have something that's like, nah, you can't attack me, they'll go, great, I'll just focus on this other person, and now that I've bitten down there, I got to keep going after them. And that single choice can sometimes win and lose you the game.
The other thing that you can consider before the game even begins is the geography of the table. At this point, you know who's going first. You know your position at the table. You also know what decks are on either side of you, especially if there's like a goad deck at the table, then that's really going to change how the dynamics of the table specifically. If there's a control player that you're right before, to like if you're to the right of a control player, you often eat a lot of their counterspell and interaction because they're holding it up the entire table and want to use their mana.
That's not great. That's not
understanding your relationship to the other dynamics at the table is going to be very important. Especially if you're like, I play a lot of board wipes because I know I'm not playing a lot of creatures, and the deck to my left is a creature deck, so they're going to be rebuilding the fastest. All of those are things that you consider without seeing a single card other than their commander.
Yeah, and you're going to know in general, too, from play style of players, but also the commanders, who's going to have the most responses. So if they're in green, they're probably going to have more responses than you in red to certain things. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, what am I going to be responsible for at this table when it comes down to it? I've got a lot of damage-based board wipes, so I'm not really going to be taking care of those artifacts and enchantments as much as this other player. As a result, what should I make sure that, again, I'm looking for in an opening hand? Or making sure I hold back? Because let's say you have the chance to kill a creature with a damage spell, or you can wait to kill a commander. Maybe that creature isn't as worth it to the commander. So understanding in the game, right, who's going to be doing what am I going to be responsible for if it comes down to it? Because if you blow your answers early and you don't have them for later in the game, I do this all the time, you're going to regret that.
Yeah, and all of this happens before, like, as you're looking for a hand and before the game actually begins. You can get all of this information just by taking the temperature of the table internally. Understanding what this game is kind of going to look like and preparing for a hand that is going to be helpful in the game that you anticipate to play out. It's not always going to play out exactly the way that you picture, but you have this time to kind of set expectations and make sure that you're ready.
Yeah, it's also like, do I want a hand with more ramp or more card draw? Right? That could be the difference maker in the game as well. Next up, who are the players? So we've talked about the decks. Let's look at the players. And of course, we mentioned Josh Lee Kwai, but we could also mention Rachel. We could also mention myself, not as much. The games aren't just about the decks, they're about the players. And understanding, for instance, who's the more novice player, who's the more experienced player. And we're not doing this to judge the players, right? We're doing this to help our threat assessment within the game. Who's the aggressive person? Who's the more passive controlled person? Who might still have that grudge against you because of a deal gone wrong in a prior game? And I think, like, as far as weighting concerns, I'm not as concerned about this part of it as much. In general, like, I find our play groups are pretty well balanced. Everyone's within the same range of player experience and player ability. And so much in the game also comes down to randomness and to deal making and all that stuff. But that's another good thing to consider, right? Like, we know Josh is great at making deals. So in which case, you might tell yourself before the game, like, hey, I'm going to just be on the lookout for deals that come in this game from Josh because I know that those can help swing games in ways. So I just know to be a little bit more on the awareness of level. It's just increasing the awareness level of that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're at a game store and you're sitting down with random people, a lot of this is just sort of vibes. Do they use Magic terminology? Do they have a pre-con? How comfortable are they shuffling their deck? All of those will give you a clue into how experienced this player is and how sharp they might be playing, or even just how competitive-minded they're going to be at the table.
Right.
So all of that gives you a good idea for who you should be worried about, regardless of their deck. They'll put, if someone looks like they have the most powerful deck, maybe you put an asterisk on it because they look like a less experienced player. Or somebody looks like a less threatening deck, but I see the way that they're shuffling and they're asking the right questions.
They're Brian Kibler card flicking. Yeah, they're really thinking through their decisions here. Huh?
This is a very thoughtful, very considerate, maybe a sneaky player.
Yeah.
All of those are easy for you to start reading when you sit down at the table.
Yeah, and it'll inform you later on, which is like, should I swing into their open mana? Oh, they're brand new to the game. They don't really, right? They're holding it for something that's obvious. Okay, I can do it. Or they said that they just want to activate their Thrasios, and clearly that's what they want to do. But it's like, oh, this is an experienced player that has a lot of options here. Maybe just not attacking at all is the best option, right?
The next biggest thing I think that we've sort of alluded to a little bit is considering which of your opponent's deck is the toughest matchup for you. I think we've talked about a lot of things. All of these are vibes that you can read very quickly.
Yeah.
But I would love to start the game knowing which deck I'm most worried about based on what deck I'm playing. And that's not something that Commander players are really used to thinking about. I think if you're playing Modern or Legacy, you know exactly what decks are very difficult for your deck to beat. Right. But in Commander, it's not as obvious. So I wanted to spend a moment talking about matchups and ways that your deck can be good or bad against another deck. Because we're not used to thinking about this.
Yeah, again, I think it's really easy for Commander players and Magic players in general to be solely just focused on what's going on their board state. I've seen this happen countless times where it's like, I'm doing all my cool stuff past the turn. Oh, you've been talking about the board wipe for 3 turns now, and I just played right into it because I wasn't
listening.
Or there's literally a thing on your board that says ping your creature for 1 damage, and I just tried to enchantment aura it with something, and I knew it could have happened, right? Oh, that Mother of Runes is just sitting there, and that's going to kill me next turn, and I didn't realize it.
Yep. And some awareness of the table is really going to level up your Magic ability.
Yeah.
The first way that the most obvious way that you think about matchups is when one strategy counters your strategy, right?
Yep.
That's the life gain burn example where I'm playing burn, I'm trying to spending individual cards to destroy your life total, and you're spending cards to bolster your life total. Obviously, that's going to be a very difficult race.
Yeah, there's also just commanders that full-blown counter your strategy as well. I used to play an Defense of the Foremost. It basically is like a ley line that exiles cards from graveyards. And it had nothing to do with my deck and what it did. It was a token deck. It just wanted that to have that effect in the command zone. But if someone sits down and they look at your commander and they go, oh, that literally 1-for-1 counters my mill strategy, then it's important to realize, okay, I can never either let them get out the gate with the commander, or I'm the one that has to be the most responsible for removing them.
Sure. If you're a life gain deck playing against Lord of Pain, I think maybe we should have talked about this in the pregame conversation, but you know that you're the one that's going to have to answer this Lord of Pain, and you're going to have lots of answers to look for it.
And they're going to want to answer you as well, the hardest, right?
For
so
sure.
You're immediately pitting yourselves against each other in that way.
So I think that's the first thing to look for. Is there any deck at the table that absolutely counters your strategy? The second thing to think about is, do they sort of sidestep your strategy? Do they dodge it? Does your strategy not affect them as much as the other people at the table? I think about this as like you're playing against a Spellslinger deck and you're playing a creature control deck. You play a lot of board wipes, you play a lot of removal spells, you're trying to answer creatures, and they're just not using their creatures as well as anybody else is.
Yeah.
So that is just like, you're not going to be affecting them with your regular plan.
Yeah, and this one's tough because sometimes it's just unavoidable. We play matchups where it's like, oh, this is like a 90% lose against this type of deck. And in those cases, you have to ask yourself, where can I get creative in beating these decks? It could be, again, what is my responsibility? Well, my responsibility isn't to get rid of their creatures, because that's not what my deck does. Maybe my responsibility here is to play in a way that benefits another opponent who may be more favorable to me and helping me do that for them, right? So there's a lot of ways around it, but knowing when you're, right, if you have a disadvantage in this case, it's better to not try and fight to better it, because you're going to spend more effort and more resources doing something your deck can't do, instead looking for other creative ways to help bolster what's happening against that matchup that's not good. Yeah.
I mean, even knowing that you're like, I'm a mono black deck, and that's a mono red artifacts deck.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just not going to be able to impact what they're doing as much as other people at the table are. That's a very important thing for you to be able to recognize when you start the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Wasting resources in a game like this is really, really bad. We talk about sandbagging sometimes, or holding back a removal spell. Knowing when to play your cards right is a big part in knowing, for instance, are they countering my strategy? I have to do something about it. Are they dodging my strategy? It's not my responsibility. Each of those tiny decisions add up over the course of the game, and that's why pro players are incredible, is because they're making thousands of those tiny decisions. Each of them is adding, let's say, 0.1% to their win potential, but they're doing it so many times that eventually it becomes 72, and then someone else is at 71, and that's what determines the win. So doing this sort of strategy is giving you that small 0.1, 0.2%, and doing it enough will get you to the point where hopefully you begin to win more.
Another one to talk about is, do they benefit from your strategy?
This has happened to me so many times.
This is if you're playing a mill deck, and you're playing against a graveyard deck. Oh no. If you're playing a group hug deck and you're playing against a big mana deck or a big card draw deck.
Right.
If you incidentally are helping a player more than you intended to, it is a good thing for you to be able to keep an eye on. If you're a mill deck, you have to recognize you're going to play against graveyard decks sometimes, so maybe you mulligan for that hate to make sure that you can answer their graveyard in a timely manner. Yeah. Something like that. This one's a little less common, but you can also think about it in terms of like maybe you're a creature control deck where that's that board wipe heavy deck that we're talking about with a lot of creature removal. You are incidentally helping this Spellslinger deck because they're worried about creatures.
Right.
And suddenly you're the one answering all the creatures for them.
Oh, right. In which case you team up against them because you know that they're weak against you. But they might have strategies to go against that too.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, but it's something to keep an eye on when you're like, okay, if I'm goading everybody, who does this benefit the most?
Right.
This benefits this player the least. It benefits this player the most. And then you have an idea of how this game is going to play out and what your impact on this game is.
Yeah, no strategy is foolproof in Commander, and that's one of the beauties of why we love to play the game. So knowing where your advantage and where your disadvantage is kind of like going into war and having multiple opponents. And again, that's why it's so hard to win sometimes, is because you do everything that you think is right, but you've left over a gaping hole over here, and through that, someone gets to take that advantage and win because of whatever reason it is.
Finally, I wanted to talk about matchups that compete with your strategy. So a lot of decks that, when they win on a specific axis. Overwhelming card advantage, overwhelming mana advantage, maybe just power on the board or going wide. If you're a go wide deck and one of your opponents is also a go wide deck,
right,
suddenly your strategy isn't countered by theirs, but it is met by theirs. And now you have to go wider to get through them, or you have to come up with a different strategy to get an advantage over that deck that isn't the primary advantage your deck is focused on.
Yeah, because if you're both just putting out, let's say, 100 tokens and you're both staring at each other, it's going to be really bad for you to both fight, and then other players are going to get the advantage of you taking each other out, right? The king making in that scenario is interesting as well.
If you're a big mana deck and your opponent is also a big mana deck, then suddenly we're doing the same thing, and it's going to be difficult for me to get an edge up on you to take you out of the game. So recognizing that is not necessarily a bad matchup for you, it just means that you're going to have to be more creative about how this deck gets an angle on a deck that's fighting on a similar axis.
Yeah, and sometimes I've seen players do this where they'll say they're both big creature decks, and I know for a fact that there's another board wipe heavy person at the table. They can put out a decent-sized board state, enough to stop anyone from attacking them, even the big mana deck that's doing the same thing, because it's like, oh, I don't want to swing my 20 creatures into tier 10, I'll lose a bunch and leave myself open, so I'll just wait until I can get that critical mass. So they'll actually sandbag a little bit and play less strong than the other player that's matching their strategy and wait for the inevitable thing that messes them up more. And then when they recover, they're all of a sudden advantage while the other player's out of cards. So it's almost like you're racing next to each other. Ether Drift's coming up. And you're understanding the dynamics of the table to the point where you can play a more macro vision of what's going to happen. So there's a lot of different ways of going around it.
All right. So those are the different ways that you can compete with the decks at the table. They can counter your strategy, they can dodge your strategy, they could benefit from your strategy, or they could compete with your strategy. Keep those in mind before the game even begins.
All right.
We are going to run through some different situations that can happen commonly in a Commander game and some questions that you can ask yourself once the game has begun. But before we get to that, we're going to hear a few words from our sponsors.
Our sponsors.
Becoming my own boss is one of the best decisions I ever made. So if you're out there and you're thinking about starting your own business, I'm here to tell you, now is the time. I know it can seem daunting, trust me, I've been there, but it is worth it. And with Shopify, you get all the tools you need to make 2025 the year you finally act on that big idea you've always wanted to pursue. They make things simple at every step of the process, from creating your brand to opening for business and getting that very first sale. And Shopify takes the hassle out of building your online storefront too, with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. They help with all the annoying details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, so you can focus on the important stuff. Having Shopify manage the Command Zone merch store means we can spend our energy making content while still being able to offer cool stuff to all our fans. And if you start your business now, who knows? Maybe someday I'll be buying your merch. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TCZ to start selling with Shopify today. That's shopify.com/TCZ. What you working on?
Oh, I'm just doing the last pass on my Nahiri deck on Commander Spellbook.
Commander Spellbook, what's that?
It's this website where you can paste your deck list or architect link, and it shows you all the infinite combos in it, plus a step-by-step guide to how they work.
Oh.
I tend to build higher power, so infinites just kind of happen by accident, but Commander Spellbook is a super easy way to find and remove them.
It's really that easy?
Yeah, here, let me paste in one of your decks.
Oh,
See? 3 infinite combos you left in by accident. Lose a fellow alchemist, and you're ready to go.
yeah, totally by accident. I will definitely be cutting that.
Commander Spellbook is the best way to check your deck for combos or find new ones to build around with its powerful search engine. Just go to commanderspellbook.com and check it out today. Again, that's commanderspellbook.com.
Welcome, travelers. I'm Kellen, Planar Trailblazer, main character of Magic the Gathering, here to help you kick off the new year. Around this time, people make all sorts of resolutions, but whatever you aim for, you can make it easier with Raycon. Look, I'm no stranger to personal change, and my Raycon Everyday Earbuds have been with me through it all. Their top-tier audio quality was perfect for blasting tunes as a daring scout, listening to true crime podcasts as an ace detective, or coordinating with my fellow outlaws as a devious rogue. And Raycon's latest model is better than ever. These earbuds come with active noise cancellation, multi-point connectivity to pair with 2 devices at once, and come in cool new colors, like my favorite, vibrant orange. But even with all that, they still start at just half the price of other premium brands. I mean, hey, with these Raycons, who knows what new types we can gain this year? We could go to the gym and become warriors, get into some monk-like meditation, or just try to be better humans who call family a little more often. That one's for you, Oko. Dad, please call me.
Get 15% off site-wide at buyraycon.com/command. That's 15% off at buyraycon.com/command. Again, buyraycon.com/command.
I think it might need more card draw.
Who are you talking to? Or is that just something you say?
Oh, no, I'm on a call with Jimmy. We're building a Chatterfang deck.
Ooh, I just added Toski. That should help, right?
Whoa, the card just showed up.
Yeah, with Architect, you can collaborate in real time from anywhere in the world.
Changes show up immediately. You don't even have to reload the page.
So it's perfect for brewing with a friend.
This is cool, but isn't Jimmy just upstairs?
Yeah, but I'm downstairs right now.
I ain't coming downstairs.
Architect is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest Commander decks. Just go to architect.com/command zone to get started.
That's archidekt.com/command zone.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about threat assessment, who is the threat, how to do all things threat related. And now let's talk about playing the actual game. We've talked about sort of what happens before the game, some stuff that you can ask yourself. And now let's get into gameplay itself, because this is where all the magic happens. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is damage, and who to attack and who to chip in damage or do damage to in general, but also sometimes first, and how to get that train rolling. So
Yeah, this is early in the game. No one's really gotten the lead yet. There's been, let's say there's no turn 1 Soul Rings, nobody's the threat already. You have a creature that wants to attack and could attack any of the players at the table productively. How do you choose who to attack here?
yeah, this is don't roll dice, as I just did another day when we were playing, Rachel, and you instantly were like, "What are you don't?" Yeah, but
I mean, you can, but
yeah. So the evaluation we talked about in the first part of this episode comes into play. Obviously, I just like attacking Josh first, because by the end of the game, it's like, wow, that 3 damage really did matter. But sometimes it's a matter of who went first. Sometimes it's a matter of just who. I like it when it's easy. You're the only person I can attack right now because everyone else has blockers, sending it in. But if everyone is sort of equal and they all have the chance to be attacked, I like going after the experienced player, typically, or the player that I deem has the highest chance of winning the game, outside of me, of course.
Yeah, I mean, all of that pregame evaluation that we just talked about comes into play here, where you're like, oh, I have an idea of who my good matchups are, my bad matchups. Yeah. I'm going to send some damage early. I think another thing to consider is what deck is going to be using their life total as a resource. Who does this chip damage matter against the most? If you're playing against a black deck that is going to be spending life to draw cards with Phyrexian Arenas or Necropotence or those kind of things, that's a good player to get 2 damage in on, because that's 2 fewer cards.
Yeah, and ultimately over the course of the game, that's going to, especially when life totals get lower and the game gets really into those every decision matters, having just a little bit less life in those scenarios, and you have to, the person that always plays Ancient Tomb or whatever, will really make a big difference, because now you're actually restricting them from 2 mana or whatever it is.
Yeah, I would also say that this is when you start thinking about who might it be difficult to attack later.
Right. Oh, that's a really good point. You're not going to get another shot
Yeah.
at hitting them.
Where it's like, I'm just going to take some free damage while I have it. This is a more controlling deck. Maybe they play more board wipes, or they might play like a Propaganda or a Ghostly Prison if they're a more defensive
I haven't seen those
style
cards in
deck.
forever, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, get those attacks in while you don't have to pay for them or while it isn't inconvenient.
Yeah.
Especially Go decks, I think, are very popular. And if I've got a couple of free hits on a Go deck, I'm going to take them.
Yeah, totally. And this is the one about rolling a dice. Don't roll a dice, or you can, but generally, don't roll a dice if you can make a choice. So
Yeah.
what's the theory behind this, Rachel?
So that's my thought on it is like, when you like, we're here to make choices. We're here to play the game, right? And you can use all of this information that we have before to inform who you attack. And there is like a correct person to attack in this
almost
moment.
always there's a generally more correct choice than not.
Yeah.
It's not 100% or 0, but it's like 60-40.
I think like if you roll a dice or if you have a tendency to roll a dice in this moment, I think it comes from either you trying to sort of deflect blame from yourself and not trying to get like start a blood feud with somebody.
Don't get mad at me. The dice decided.
Which is a strategy, right? To be like, oh, I didn't choose to attack you. I could have attacked anybody. I just attacked. I needed to attack.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I try not to like play into that because it's like, oh, okay, you just didn't make a decision in that moment.
And now I've started a feud with you. As a result.
Great, thank you. But that is a strategy, right? To be like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
The dice chose the Lords of Chaos.
Yeah. So that is a strategy you can make. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I think it's totally fine if it's, for instance, 4 brand new players, or maybe you're teaching someone and they're just panicking because they're like, I don't want to make the wrong choice. It's like, okay, it's all equal right now. This is probably the only time it's going to happen in the game because everyone's going to start getting creatures on the board and the choice will be more obvious. So yeah, you can roll a dice and just not have to have that mental pressure on.
Yeah.
But I'd say a sign of a more graduated player is, okay, I'm going to swing at you, and then the players that are around the table, if they're around that same level, go, yep, that makes sense. I don't disagree with it. You're not wrong. And honestly, if you're getting angry at like 2 points of damage on turn 3 or 4, maybe you should take a breath.
Your threat assessment is blinded by rage.
Yeah, blinded by rage over 2 points of damage.
You have 40 for a reason.
Yeah.
Get a blocker.
You get a blocker. Get out of here.
So that's like early game. You don't have a ton of information yet. But there comes a time in any game where you start having more damage to throw around. You've got 10, 12. You can start taking like real bites out of people's life totals.
Yeah.
Not lethal. You can't take anybody out. You want to keep some of your defenses up. But you've got a good solid attack or a big burn amount that you can send at somebody to make one of your opponents start feeling a little less comfortable with where they are in the game.
Yeah, or it's you have entered the battlefield effects or triggered abilities that you need to point or direct at someone. It's like, or a Blood Artist effect that only goes at one player. Who are you going to keep choosing to have that happen to? So it's who are you pressuring in this case? And this is where things can get a little more hairy because if you overpressure someone and completely sort of take them out of contention and knock them out of the game, it can feel bad. But sometimes if you don't, you come to regret that decision very quickly. And I've been in that position a lot. Like, I don't want to hurt them too much. And then 2 turns later, it's like, I should have put everything I had at them. Why didn't I pressure them harder?
Yeah, I think even in the middle of the game, people want to keep life totals even, where they're like, all right, I targeted you with Blood Artist last turn, I'll get you. And now I'll do you. But this is sort of your opportunity to start applying pressure to the deck that you know that you're not good against.
Yeah. Or the one that is now building something that is going to be very threatening or is threatening.
The pressure, I think, is you can start thinking about it as you're making them easier to take out of the game later.
Yeah.
Where it's like you're not taking them out of the game now, but you're trying to simplify the routes to take out a player that you know is going to be difficult in the long run.
Yeah, so a really easy way to just gut check the table is who has the most permanence on the board. Now, if it's like, okay, they got 20 1/1 tokens and everyone has creatures to block, that's a little different. But it's more like, wow, they have like 7 enchantments, 4 artifacts, and all these creatures, and everything's doing something to each other. I don't know what's going on, but I think I need to pressure this player because they're just doing 5 times more than everyone else at the table.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the first thing that everybody looks at. It's like, who's got the most stuff? They're the person I need to worry about.
Yeah. And generally, I think you're pretty right about it.
Yeah, I think it's a good
part.
approximation.
Yeah, it's a good approximation. It's not always right. Nothing is foolproof in what we're going to talk about, but it's a good way to just at least go, okay, let's focus on them first and break down, should I pressure them over someone else?
Yeah. The next thing I think about that's very basic is just who has access to the most mana.
Yeah.
So who, like, based on their lands and their mana rocks, what you can see on the battlefield, who can make the most mana, who's going to cast the most impactful things, hypothetically.
Yeah, and what goes along with that is how many cards are in their hand. A lot of times you can make really bad threat assessment when someone has everything on board and you know what's going on and they've just got one card in their hand. And I've seen players like that flounder because they go, oh, well, I don't have any card advantage and I'm just kind of stuck here past the turn. And meanwhile, the player that had 70 cards in hand or whatever is actually doing much, much more, even though their board state didn't look quite as scary.
Yeah, and we think very literally about like how many cards do you have in your hand, and I think that is a great way to. It's a great question to ask in this moment when you're trying to make a decision. You should also look at how big the graveyards are, and just generally, I think looking at whose deck is the thinnest is a very good way to be like, okay, who's seen the most cards?
Yeah.
And that's like whether they're casting things from exile and they've got a big exile pile or who they're milling the most. All of those are intentional. And if they're intentionally getting through that much of their deck, that means something is working over there.
Yeah, if they've looted like 17 times, that means that they've kept the best cards out of those 17 draws. And yeah, they've got a big graveyard now, but really, what are they holding in their hand? Because that information is pretty powerful. I also like to look at whose momentum is increasing and whose momentum is decreasing. Sometimes really powerful decks get off to strong starts, but then falter because of a board wipe, or they just exhaust all the resources and they don't have the way to rebuild it. While another deck is just slowly adding on, and you can tell that at any moment they're going to have one of those turns where it's like a 5 to 10 minute turn where they're just doing tons of stuff. So if someone's momentum is increasing while someone else's is decreasing, you're not as advantaged attacking the decreasing player even if they look a little scarier. It may be that the momentum increasing player is the one that's going to take over because no one was there to slow them down and sort of like pump the brakes.
It may look like somebody's ahead if they have more stuff on board, but if they have been stopped in a major way, then they may get stuck there a little bit longer than the person that's crawling up.
Yeah.
We've been like, everybody's been in a commander game where like somebody looked behind on board and got left alone a little bit too long.
Too long, yeah.
And they took over the game, whether they missed land drops or just sort of sandbagged in the early game. And suddenly they exploded and were the problem all at once.
Yeah. I've seen this where it's like the player that is the one answering everything, killing things, getting rid of permanents, and you go, wow, they've been the threat all game because they've been destroying everything. But it's like, yeah, but at the cost of all the resources in their hand. This other player here has just sort of been smiling and adding cards and adding more cards and things, and now they're going to jump out to be the threat. So it's always good to just have that awareness, right? And not put too much emphasis on something because of how it affected things earlier in the game. Things are always changing in Commander.
Yeah, I think at this point in the game, we're not quite to the point where somebody is threatening to win next turn, but maybe somebody's tutored once, or maybe somebody's drawn 3 cards. So you can start to see people assembling, preparing for the late game, and some people are going to be further from taking out the entire table than others at the table who have just drawn a couple extra cards, who have tutored maybe, who are have a couple draw engines going on board.
Yeah, exactly.
This is, again, you can go back to what deck is just the worst matchup. Yep. If you want to make somebody easier to take out, it's got to be the player that you have the least chance of taking out. If you've got a free 12 points of damage on them, take it. Take it when you can. Especially if you're just the kind of deck that is not going to benefit the longer the game goes. You've got to take the damage where you can get it, and you can't be super cute about it. Because 3 damage here, 3 damage here, 3 damage here doesn't do nearly as much as 9 damage to one player.
Yep. And don't feel bad either. That's a big thing to put. Like sometimes people feel really bad for pressuring someone else, but those are the moments where the games are often won or lost. I can't tell you how many games now I've lost because I feel a little bad. I'm not going to hurt you a little bit more here. And then it turns out that was the single decision that led to me losing the game. So if you can take that emotional part out of it, and I think other players understand that as well, then you're going to be in a much better shot for making the choices when you need to make them and keeping it confined within the game space too.
Yeah, I mean, this whole episode is about making you a more confident player when you make decisions.
Yeah.
Or a more informed player when you make decisions. If you're the type of player that's just like, look, I'm hanging out, I want everybody to to just be at the same and if I die, I die, which is like absolutely a way that you can play Commander and is totally valid, then go with God. You can make decisions however you want to make sure that the game is as most fun as possible.
Yeah.
What we're trying to give you is the tools to make educated decisions on how to play better. If you're an LGS player, if you're trying to improve your Commander skills, this is going to help you there. But sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes we're hanging.
Sometimes we're just chilling with good vibes and a beer. If you can drink. Okay, the next thing that you mentioned here I think is really interesting, which is like asking yourself we're in the middle game now, who's benefited the most from the way that this game has played out?
Yeah.
So let's say you're the Spellslinger deck and you're loading up your hand and everyone else is creature-based and you've cast 2 board wipes this game. And it only costs you 2 cards to do so, but it costs everyone else, let's say, a total of 25 to 30 cards. In that case, you have been harmed the least and other players have been harmed the most. You have been the most advantaged and you would be the one that players should be pressuring instead of looking at each other because you've benefited from how this game has just worked.
Yeah. I think something that's worth like a huge mistake that we see in Commander all the time, and I've made it and you've made it, and it's part of the Commander cycle, is when a player gets ahead and all the players are like, it's time to take that person out. And I'm going to remove that, and you're going to remove this, and you're going to remove that, and then they'll be solved. And then suddenly you're like, okay, I've spent 2 removal spells, and they've lost 2 things. You spent 1 removal spell, and they've lost 1 thing. And then there's this 4th player here who has spent no removal spells, who has lost no cards, and we're still worried about the original player who has lost 3 things.
And that player that has lost nothing keeps telling everyone to be worried about that player.
So you have to look at what has happened in the last turn.
Yeah.
And you're like, who has benefited from what has happened in the last turn? I've lost 2 cards. You've lost 3 cards.
And
you've lost a card.
Nothing.
And you're quiet.
Yeah. Or sometimes you're the loudest, because I would say I am often that player, which is like, I'm correct in my threat assessment, and I'm telling everyone why, and I'm justifying it. But I'm not saying that I'm not threatening.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that if you get rid of that, it actually benefits this card in my hand that no one knows about, right? So it really is interesting in those scenarios and that's the beauty of the game, right? Everyone should be doing this to some degree. I like getting rid of bad things on the table that are hurting me. Just maybe players don't realize that being gone is way better for, right? Like if I'm the graveyard deck, but everyone else kind of has some graveyard stuff going on, me overemphasizing get rid of the graveyard thing and people believing me is going to help me more than others. So in those cases, you have to sort of see what are the residual effects of what just happened, and then where a player is going to go from this new starting line.
Yeah, I mean, even it's something as simple as like life totals just got halved. Maybe this deck is like a mono black drain deck, and they've halved all the life totals, and everybody is like, oh, that we've got to kill the deck that did that, and you're like, yeah, probably, but you know who also benefited from that is this aggressive creature deck. Because life totals are now halved.
Yeah.
You know who didn't benefit from that? Maybe the slower, dirtlier deck.
And they've been waiting for you to tap out. And now you just did. Dun, dun, dun.
Wah.
Yeah, this one's a really complicated one, but I think in general, you can always ask yourself that question, which is like, who's at the end of it, when the dust settles, who's up, who's down? And where does that now put you within the power rankings?
Yeah. I think another interesting point like that is wheels.
Good
if a
point.
wheel resolves, who benefited the most? It's obviously the person who like gained the most cards,
Yeah.
but maybe it's the person who can use the most cards.
Right.
So it's good to be constantly checking in during a game and be like, okay, a lot has happened this game. It was this and this and that, which this benefited that person, this benefited this person. This person has lost 3 things. And there's a moment in Extra Turns that I think about all the time.
Yeah.
Where I was playing against, it was the Warhammer episode. I was playing Celestine, which is a pretty control-y deck. It's
The
like
white
life gain,
mono, yeah.
and I could keep looping
Redraw.
removal
Yeah.
spells.
Oh, wow.
Like
yeah.
removal creatures
Yeah,
is
yeah.
basically how the deck was working in that game. Not exactly intentionally, but that was what it was doing.
Based on the life you gained each turn, right?
Yeah, I could recur a creature that usually had a removal spell in that case
Laura.
on the ETB. And it was... I was really worried about, because I was looping the Angel of the Ruins, I was really worried about taking Jordan out of the game because he had an artifact-focused deck. So I was like, I could remove basically Jordan's whole board repeatedly. But he's not the problem in this moment. Jamie's the problem in this moment. So I removed a couple of Jamie's pieces on the first time. And then the second time, I removed a couple more of Jamie's pieces, I think. And in that moment, I missed an onboard infinite combo on Jordan's board because nobody saw it in the game. And I removed like a signet of Jamie's.
Oh my gosh.
Like I just overdid it so
yeah.
much because he was really advantaged in the early game. But I was like, I want to pick off his card draw engine. I want to pick off like
some ramp
and just like slow down the X spell deck. But in that moment, I missed the, he had like a Phaedo Alchemist with the bracers that untaps infinitely or something like that. And it was just like, well.
Who won the game?
We got a little bit, I did.
So it turned out it
Spoiler
didn't
alert.
matter in the
end. It worked out fine.
Yeah. Sometimes too, by the way, you can just ask the table. I can get rid of 2 things. What do we think we should get rid of? And then if everyone's chipping in, they're going to point out each other's stuff. No one's going to be like, don't look at my board, because someone else might be like, no, that has to go. And I think in that scenario, probably someone would have gone, how about the illusionist bracers on Jordan's board over the signet?
Yeah. It was one of those you just get a little tunnel visioned and get a little stuck.
Tunneling is really common, and I find that it ruins experiences more than betters them because it does allow sometimes for that player that hasn't been touched to skyrocket.
Yeah. And you have to remember that every new decision is a new decision. You have to reevaluate. So it's like I was just sort of defaulting to what I had done in the last turn, but could have done a reevaluation. A lot happens in a turn.
Is that why Jamie won't look you in the eye anymore?
Yeah.
I knew it.
We haven't spoken in years.
I knew it. All right. A couple of red herrings when choosing who to pressure. Oftentimes it's like, oh, who has the most life? I'll attack them. But that's not necessarily correct. That one's really important.
I think this is like the first lesson in threat assessment is that the life total doesn't tell you a lot. Because like sometimes a person's life total is low is because they've drawn 3 extra cards with a Sylvan Library.
Right.
Like they did that to themselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes a person's life total is high because they just had their commander removed with the Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
Like that indication is not necessarily what has actually happened in the game. It is an incidental moment.
Yeah. Especially if it's like everyone's at 37, 35, and 34, and 32. It's like, don't just go after the 37. Go after the thing that, based on everything we just talked about, who's the most threatening to you, who has the chances to pop off the soonest, da-da-da-da. Go after that.
I think that also it often feels the most fair, and people feel like you can't be mad, you have the most life.
Yeah.
So this means the least to you.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's sort of like rolling dice in that way, where this is a largely irrelevant reason to attack somebody when the life totals are that high.
Yeah.
If somebody is at 6 and somebody is at 17, like that's a more different, significant, a difference in life total in terms of like where they are in the game. And maybe you could take out the person at 6 life. Cool.
Maybe. Okay, now that we've pressured players are now getting to the point where they can start dropping like flies. So the real big question is, who do I kill first? Who do I take out of the game before the other players?
Yeah, if you have a Voltron deck, this is a huge decision.
Yeah.
Who do I try and eliminate first?
Yeah, this one I think is actually the thing that determines most games, because it's at this point in the game where it's like, if I don't do this, then it's just over. Or if I kill the wrong player, then it's just over. And really good players will know that this is important and fight to jockey for position really hard in this position as well. And even set up their board in a way to not have that option be open to get rid of them, because they know that once the dominoes start falling, the game's going to end really quickly.
Yeah. We keep coming back to it, but look for who's your bad matchup. If you have a moment to take out a deck that you're not going to be good against, try to eliminate them from the game. It absolutely makes the most sense, especially if you're playing Voltron and you're like, I know they have Edict effects there in black.
Yeah.
Like, I have to take this window to eliminate you while I have it.
Yeah, I've been lucky so far that they haven't been able to assemble this Edict thing. I'm not going to push my chances anymore. And even though I might put myself a little bit open here, I just know that there's a ticking time bomb if I don't get rid of that player.
Right.
I like this one. Who can you not afford to be in a 1v1 with? Especially after the dust settles and people have spent resources to either stay alive or die.
When it comes down to like you and the most controlling deck and you're a creature deck, you have a tough uphill battle at this moment.
Not going to be easy.
Because they're better in the late game than you are. Their deck is designed to have answers and yours is not.
Yeah.
You are going to have to fight tooth and nail to get through all of their defenses. I think about there's an extra turns. It was the Street Fighter episode where it came down to, I think, like I was a big threat and Gaurav was a big threat and he was the controlling deck at the
Honda
table.
deck, I think, yeah.
He was playing the multi-kicker.
Oh, Chun-Li.
Yeah, Chun-Li.
Jeskai spells. Yeah.
I think it's Azorius.
Azorius spells. Okay.
Either
So
way.
it's a lot of spells being
It's
cast.
a lot of spells.
A lot of kicks.
And he was behind, so he didn't get eliminated, but he was able to stabilize and could cast a Cyclonic Rift every turn.
Oh,
and
my
because
gosh.
he wasn't eliminated while he was on the back foot, he was able to stabilize because his deck is strongest in the late game, which is a mistake from me, likely just being like, my deck is the most proactive at the table. I have to take out the player who can interrupt me the best.
Who won that game?
Graf.
Yep, makes sense. Psych Rift every turn?
Yeah.
I was really hoping you said me.
Me also. No.
Look at how Rachel's so good at not being the threat.
No, that was Graf.
Yeah. Also, like, who is, in addition to who can you not afford being a 1v1 with, who can you not afford to attack if they have the ways to stop you from trying to take them out? I've seen this a big thing too. It's like, hey, I know I should kill this person, but if I do, they're going to decimate my board state as a result, and I'm going to just not be able to win at all from there because they've been waiting for someone to do so. Sometimes you have to go, yes, you are the person I should get rid of, but we need to be more coordinated about it. Or if I do so, it's going to put me so dead, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to be able to play or win the game from that scenario. And that's sort of like the deck that can most easily interrupt your board state. So if you are a heavily creature Voltron deck that's stacking a bunch of auras on one thing and they have 1 blue mana open, probably you maybe should kill them, but you probably shouldn't kill them right now.
Yeah, that bounce spell would blow you out of the water.
Yeah, the interruption of the momentum is also another thing. It's like a tire blows out, Ether Drift on your car. You're not going to be able to cross the finish line. So even though you may see the perfect line to take, if there's a high chance of a tire being blown out as a result, you might have to deviate and figure out a better way to take care of that problem.
Yeah, something else that I was thinking about is the opposite side of who can most interact with your winning board state is who can you interact with the best. Like from here, do you need to remove them from the situation, or will the naturalize in your hand set them back far enough that they're not a problem right now?
Right.
Like whose deck is the least effective against you, or is your hand the best against? Maybe you're like, you have a Swords to Plowshare, so you're not as worried about the Voltron deck, and they're a free kill right now, but it's better for you to spend resources taking out a player that might be difficult long-term because you have the answer to the Voltron deck across the table from you.
Yeah, and you know that you can pull that out from your back foot or back pocket. And that's kind of another moves into this next one, which is like looking at the board state, who could have the win that's hiding in their hand. So this is kind of like the Chun-Li example, which is just like, man, if Gaurav can do something like a Cyclonic Rift every turn, then there's no way we're going to win.
Right.
Or just knowing that, like, okay, they've tutored, they've drawn a lot, they've looted a lot. This person has been waiting really patiently for some reason. Does that mean that they're holding something over your head that you don't know?
Right.
And in that case, it may be like, now that your window of opportunity is here to take them out, you should. Otherwise, you're going to get punished by whatever it is that they're waiting to cast on you.
Yeah, I picture this with green decks when you're like, okay, they've got like 6 1/1s on board.
Yeah.
But 6 1/1s in green can be 6 10/10s really quickly.
Crater hoofing it.
So you have to have an idea for what you're afraid of from each deck and how many cards are in their hand, how much card advantage or card selection have they gotten, what are the odds that they have the thing you're most worried about. If you're a Voltron deck, who are you most worried about has a removal spell?
Yeah.
Or who are you most worried about has like a damage deflection or something like that?
Yeah,
Goat.
deflecting palm.
All of these things that like you're very soft to, you need to keep an eye on. If they have this, how does it affect me? Can I win the game if they have this?
Yeah, and if you can force their hand before they're ready, then even better, because you could disrupt their plans, and then they're much more sort of like taken out from being able to do what they want later on.
Yeah, this is a big decision. You have to sort of use everything to decide who you can take out. And sometimes it's just, you know what? I have to spend fewer resources to take you out, which means I have more in the late game. So I have to hold the cards in my hand and just take the free kill here.
If you can take the emotion out of it, that's, I'd say, the best. Like the emotion part of it is usually where we get tricked into going, oh, but if I do this, they'll feel bad. And it turns out like, well, I don't feel bad as much because they killed me as a result of me taking it easy on them.
Yeah.
So
another big decision that I'm not as adept at is choosing who to ally with.
Well, because you're a killer.
Because I'm a killer.
Yeah.
No, I just don't do a good job of being like, we should be allies in this moment.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I tend to kind of just be like, if I can't do it, I'll die.
Yeah, it's tough because alliances often don't last more than a turn too,
Yeah.
as well. So like if you spend a lot of energy on an alliance and it really doesn't fizzle out to anything, it doesn't feel as satisfying in the game. It's just sort of doing what you have in your hand and just going, you know what, I don't have time to structure a weird, crazy deal with all these terms and whatever. I'm just going to do what I want to do.
Right. So I think there's a lot of things to consider in this moment. It's like, is there an obvious threat that you have to sort of, I'm not going to be able to kill them alone. I need a person to team up with.
Yeah.
So is it time? Is it now? Do we die, or can we take this
I think
player
that's
out?
the easiest alliance, which is like, everyone, please look at Rachel's board state. Can we please agree to just deal with it as much as we can together before we get back to killing each other?
Yeah.
And usually those decisions are pretty easy to make, and it's very hard for the person that's so far ahead to argue against it.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, those are the easy alliances. It's more like hey, do you want to just for one turn hit them so that I can, or get rid of their blocker so that I can get this through? And it's tough too because sometimes you're laying out your strategy, and that allows also the opponents to get around it. So choosing new alliances, like it's all about timing, right? It's also a lot about turn order.
Turn order, I think, is the most interesting thing about alliances, because you really don't want to form an alliance with somebody who's going to have the first turn after the alliance is broken.
Is broken, yeah. Because then they have the most time and choice to do what they will with, let's say you're all tapped out and you're like, all right, alliance is over, but I'm all tapped out and you can kill me now. It's like, oh, wait, didn't think that through. So I think you generally want to untap and be done with an alliance before it gets back to other people. Structure alliances in the way that you're protected towards the beginning of till the beginning of your turn, if that makes sense.
And maybe if you have to weight an alliance a little differently to get that deal done, then so be it. But recognizing that, like, if you can have an extra turn on the person that you're choosing to go down to the 1v1 or maybe the 1v1v1,
Yeah.
you get to sort of determine the turn order fresh when a player gets eliminated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When the player's out, the turn order shifts. So if your alliance is going to do that, think about what the new landscape looks like afterwards.
Yeah. Choosing just who do you think you can beat when it comes down to the the 1v1 or the 1v1v1.
You and me team up, get rid of this player, and when it's 1v1, I'm pretty sure I got this.
Yeah, I have a good matchup against your deck. My board, I think I have a couple things in hand that'll get me ahead, so I can take over. But like, you don't team up with the player that you're like, well, then they just kill me.
Yeah. I like alliances with players that are like close to eliminated because they are more willing to throw away things, in your favor because they're done anyway. They're dead no matter what on the next player's turn, so they may as well alliance now. And looking for those scenarios, I think, is always a really powerful way to get an advantage in the game.
And just always considering, like, are you getting anything real out of this? Like, do you need to make promises to deal with this situation? Because being in an alliance that you don't need is not what you want.
Yeah, an alliance isn't necessarily, here's the terms, let's shake on it. It can just be more general, too, which is like, we all agree Rachel is the threat, so let's just try and get rid of some of the stuff on our board. It's not, you use your Cross and Grip here and I'll use this thing there. It's like, no, let's all just work together until this is resolved, and the alliance is looser. And I like those as well. It doesn't require as much, the lawyer talk that sometimes can be a little toxic to certain play groups.
Yeah.
It's just about playing together and figuring out how the ways to play more together, in a way.
There is one more big discussion when talking about threat assessment, and it's removal spells. It's interaction.
Yeah, interaction.
And how and when do you decide to spend a card to remove a card on your opponent's board, or even a board wipe? So the next section we're going to talk about is just, should I use my
removal spell?
Removal spell is the first thing we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and also, should I use it right now, or can I wait?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to think about. I tried to put together like sort of a decision tree when talking about, should I spend a removal spell? So by removal spell, I mean single target, I mean instant speed, and it deals with one permanent. That's what we're discussing at this moment.
Not board wipe.
So can you beat it is the first question. Is this a thing on board that your deck has the power to actually defeat if it remains on the board?
So great example is your graveyard deck, and it's a ley line, that the black one that exiles cards from graveyards, or it's a rest in peace.
Yeah, you can't beat that. That is not a thing you can beat. You have to spend a removal spell on it.
Yeah.
The question then becomes when. There's
When.
more questions that follow. But if you can beat that permanent, don't spend a removal spell.
Yeah, so I've seen so many people mistakenly get rid of mana doublers.
Yeah.
Stuff because like, oh, you're going to be able to make so much mana with it with one card in hand or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's more like, actually, my strategy doesn't care about you spitting a ton of creatures out in your creature-based deck. I can just board wipe.
Yeah,
So
I
don't-
have a tool.
Yeah, and if
against that.
someone else finds it more threatening, great. Let them use their removal spell on it. But generally, you shouldn't be removing things, I think, unless you are the one that absolutely has to do it. I always hope for when I play games of Commander that other players will have similar, if not worse, problems with cards that I have problems with.
Yes.
Because it means that they're going to be the ones that have to go, can I beat that permanent? No? Okay, it's probably on me to remove it.
Yeah, the next question is a big one is that permanent your problem? And so it's like, yeah, there's a rest in peace in deck on the board, and I don't love it. I'm playing like a white deck that kind of likes to use its graveyard,
Yeah.
but I'm not the green-black graveyard deck over there.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something that needs to get off the battlefield.
Yeah.
So try not to spend a removal spell that you think somebody else needs worse than you.
Yeah, and understanding that is just knowing what the decks are doing.
Especially if somebody's already indicated, don't worry, I can remove that.
Yeah. And that's one of my favorite things to hear in the game where something comes down and someone goes like, oh, I gotta get rid of that. And I'm looking at my removal spell and going like, yeah, you gotta get rid of that.
You got to get rid of that.
Thank you for telling me
sure.
that you gotta get rid of that.
So the next question is like, yes or no, I can't beat that permanent. No or yes, that permanent is my problem. And now, is that permanent your problem now? Can you let it be for a second?
Probably.
Do you have to spend the removal spell this instant?
Oftentimes the answer is, yeah, you can let it be. So Blightsteel Colossus is a great example of this. Everyone looks at this and goes, I'm dead to it. And you also look at your board and go, oh, actually, I can block this with like 5 things. And then you look at your opponent's boards and go like, oh, poor Bradley over there is done for.
Yeah.
So in that case, that permanent isn't your problem. Now that permanent is actually your friend.
Yeah. You're like, that is a future problem. And this Swords to Plowshares is very valuable to me. I'm not going to spend it now to save this person. I'm going to spend it when it's attacking me.
Yep.
I'm going to spend it when suddenly it's being copied. I'm going to spend
Right.
it. Oh, actually, I can't spend it on the Blightsteel. I have to spend it over here because this is a problem for me now. So sometimes it's like just waiting until the last possible second when that instant is your only hope to get out of this problem.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, will my targeted interaction spell actually solve the problem? So I've seen a lot of times cases where someone's like, oh, kill it, delete it, and the person goes, reanimate it.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I should have known that. They're a reanimator deck, or their commander is the Locust God.
Sure, yeah.
It's like I've seen people kill the Locust God and go, wait, what do you mean it goes back to your hand? It's like, oh, we needed a better way to remove that. In fact, you should have imprisoned it in the moon is what you should have done, right?
And sometimes you have to do what you have to do. It has to get off the board right now. It's attacking you and it's going to kill you. You have to remove it.
They're going to make infinite
Don't
bugs.
spend a card on something that is going to come back with little to no effort from your opponent. Like I was in a recent situation where I had a Volrath Stronghold and I could just put a creature from my graveyard on top of my library. I had an onboard way to recur a creature and had a creature destroyed. And I was like, I have never been happier
Here we go.
to have like I'd rather it not be spent on my stuff. I'd rather that be used against my opponents. But I'll put it back on top of my library and I'll cast
and
it again.
use it
And
again.
here it is.
Yeah.
And now we're right back where we were, and you're down a card.
Yeah.
And those situations are like, was it worth the removal spell? Was that tempo change worth it? And sometimes the answer is yes, but I would say often spending a card to slow your opponent down just a tiny bit
Not so great.
is not great.
A counterpoint to that is like a Yoshimaru deck. It's like that creature's getting bigger and bigger and it's hitting people harder and harder. And so, yeah, removing it, they can recast it for really cheap, but they have to recast it.
Right.
Instead of doing what their deck's trying to do. So in that case, yeah, slowing them down is worth it.
That's a big tempo swing, though.
Yeah.
Me just being like in a reanimator deck, just being like, it's back.
It's like, oh.
Is like I barely stumbled
Whoops.
to get
Yeah.
this thing happening again.
Another good thing to ask yourself is like, if I don't use this removal spell right now, are there other ways that my deck can answer this? Or on board, or for instance, my commander has a way of dealing with this, so it's actually repeatable. A lot of times we waste premium removal spells, right? It's kind of like the removal spell should match the level of threat. Path to Exile is so good because it exiles and it gets rid of something at a cheap mana cost. And if you're just doing that to a Llanowar Elves, it doesn't feel as great because that thing could have died a billion different
definitely
ways.
don't Path to Exile a Llanowar Elves.
Yeah,
give
he's
them a
got
land.
Sorry, Swords of Plowshares, a Llanowar Elves. But you don't want to waste a premium removal spell on something that's not great. So asking yourself the quality of a removal spell versus the target, and then asking yourself, are there other ways I can get rid of this? Because oftentimes I found that saved me games where I just wait and go, I have something else I can use, and I have to save this for something else that's more important.
A great example is like a creature removal spell like a Swords to Plowshares. If you know you're going to cast a board wipe in 1 or 2 turns.
Right.
Like if this creature is going to be gone some other way without you spending an additional card, sometimes you have to get rid of it now, but often it's going to be dealt with without me spending an additional resource to get it gone.
Yeah.
Or just like I have a lot of creature spells, removal spells. Like if I know my deck has 6 ways to targeted remove creatures, then I'll spend those a little bit more flippantly. Whereas like if you have Feed the Swarm, I've got 1 way to deal with enchantments.
Right.
Is this the moment? Is this the enchantment that I have to spend this on?
Yeah.
Or if something else comes down, am I going to regret having spent that?
Yeah. Or is that creature so dangerous that I have to use the creature removal part of this because I can't afford to wait for another removal spell or an enchantment? Okay. Counterspelling. This I don't really know about. I don't think I've ever played Counterspell in my life.
I think Counterspell is very similar to all the other ones, but there's a couple of different things to consider with Counterspells, right? The window to use them is much, much narrower. It's when it's on the stack. That's it. You have to make your decision now. And it can answer anything.
Anything. Well, most anything, unless the spell says it can't be countered.
Most anything.
But yeah, it's a much better catch-all, right? Feed the Swarm, great example. That's not getting rid of artifacts. That's not getting rid of planeswalkers. Counterspell, however, can catch anything. It just requires you leave the mana open.
I'm extremely precious about what I use counterspells on. Like I would rarely spend a counterspell on a creature. I would rarely spend a counterspell on like an enchantment if I'm in white or green, unless it is an imminent threat to the board, if it is going to win the game.
Yeah, like a Sanguine Blood combo or something.
Because they're so good defensively, they can counter board wipes, they can save my butt, they can counter removal spells, they can counter win cons. If I'm using it to kind of slow down an opponent, I feel like I haven't used it to its max power level.
Yeah, and a lot of people will hold up Counterspell, and by the time it gets back to them, there's nothing that's been worth countering, so they just counter the last spell that's been cast. I think that's a big mistake. A lot of times.
You're going down a card to take care of 1 card, which leaves 2 other opponents down no cards.
Yeah, and you countered something that didn't really need to get lost.
Yeah.
Right?
I would rather waste 2 mana than waste a card any day.
Yeah. And decks like that, too, will build in for 2 mana, they draw some cards instead or whatever. So you're not always stuck in that position. But I know a lot of people go like, well, I didn't want to waste the mana anyway. And then it significantly puts them down. Now, there are some scenarios where it's like, yes, you should be spending the cards out of your hand no matter what. And even if that thing was a mediocre spell that you countered, it's still good enough. But that's sort of the nuance of playing control and understanding, again, how you built your deck in a way to make you have the chance to make the best decisions over and over again.
Yeah, and I mean, only you know how many counterspells you have.
Yeah.
Right? So I typically play like 3 when I'm playing blue, so my odds of drawing a second one are not super high.
Yeah.
So I will be more precious about it than somebody who is playing 8.
Yeah. Okay. Board wipes.
Board wipes.
Should I use my board wipe? Should I clean this thing up?
This is a very difficult question because I think board wipes get used as like an emergency button mostly. Is like, we're going to die, we need a board wipe.
Hit the button.
And obviously in those cases, definitely cast the board wipe. You're going to die. But I think proactive board wipes in an early game, when you have a board wipe in your opening hand and you can play around it, are very powerful.
Yeah, totally.
Like if you're like, all right, I have a Wrath of God in my hand. I'm going to want to cast it on turn 3 or 4. So I'm going to play a setup enchantment. I'm going to do some ramping. I'm going to develop my board in other ways. And maybe I'll take some damage from some creatures. But then I'm going to cast this board wipe and I'm going to kill 6 creatures. And I will have developed and I will have set all of my opponents back after that.
Right. Yeah. I think like knowing, I mean, the main thing is like board wipes are to protect your life from ending or to getting to the point where if you didn't do it, you're going to be at such a disadvantaged position that you're just done for. I think turn order comes right back into play as well. And I've seen so many board wipes get played where it's like, oh no, I played the board wipe and somehow everyone's stronger than they were before.
Yeah.
Because of the turn order, now I'm last to build. So sometimes the board wipe is like, if you don't have to actually do it, wait till you can play the board wipe and some other stuff. Or hold up some mana for whatever you're going to be doing next.
Or play board wipes that affect you less. One-sided board wipes have been much more popular in design, so you can build your deck with a single board wipe in mind, so you don't lose your whole board, but your opponents do. Or just, like I said, plan ahead. Know that you're going to cast this board wipe. Set them back further, like have them lose more cards than you did.
You're playing a bunch of ramp early and one Death Toucher to stop people from attacking you. So then the board wipe comes when everyone's developed out and you're not losing that much and you're keeping your artifact pieces.
A big question is, can I wait a turn on this board wipe?
Oh man, this is, I think, like a dilemma for any player that's ever had a board wipe in their hands. And for me, I often fall into the trap of like, let's just give it one more turn.
To get a little bit more value out.
Yeah, I mean, they're all going to play more stuff, right? And then someone combos off or someone does something that goes like, oh, that's that in the Chroma's Memorial I see over there? Or whatever the indestructible one. It's like, oh, poop.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike when you're like, I could cast this board wipe and it wouldn't affect me very much. It would take out a bunch of problems on a set of pieces in particular. But if I wait one more, then that deck has haste. Who knows what can happen?
It's a tough one. I think you just, your mileage may vary.
I think the final question to ask is, does this board wipe actually benefit me? Do I come out ahead of this? Like, sometimes the answer is, I'm not dead. That's better than dead.
That's better than dead.
But if you cast a board wipe, you can look around and be like, well, there's a graveyard deck that's going to be able to recover from this very easily. There's this deck is only losing like one creature in it, and I'm losing 4. Like, is that actually benefiting me to cast this right now? And can I solve the issue without blowing up my spot as much as everybody else's?
Yeah, we just talked about all these different things you can do to help clear things out the board that isn't necessarily the bomb that destroys your stuff too. And so knowing when to, and that's why I think players play less and less board wipes, is because of how fast players can rebuild and how resilient some decks are. It just doesn't feel as worth it as like really tempoing them out and stopping their commander player, whatever it is, with a counterspell or that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I often find that I'd rather play board wipes that are ones that are like, get rid of all artifacts.
Sure.
Because that feels more impactful than just kill all creatures, or get rid of all enchantments in certain metas can just be a blowout for certain players and not so much for you.
All right. We talked a little bit about counterspells and we talked about interaction, but there is a big question that happens sort of not, should I use this removal spell, but it's, should I hold open mana for interaction? When do I have to be ready to try and interrupt my opponents?
Yeah, I could play another 2-drop here, or I could just wait and hopefully have something to counter by the time it gets back to me.
There comes a time in a Commander game where people start jockeying for position to win, and it's kind of an energy thing. Everybody's assembled they have a board, they have like a draw engine online, they've drawn a bunch of cards, and now we're all like,
how do we, Mexican standoff? Yeah, the standoff. Yeah. How do we win? How am I going to beat everyone else? What's my advantage here? You're jockeying for position, yeah.
So those are the moments when I do not want to be tapped out.
Yeah.
Unless
you're still behind that, you have to, right?
Yeah, sometimes you have to tap out and they're not going to kill you because you're the one in last. But and you have to just play what you're going to play. But if you're looking at a player and they've drawn a bunch of cards or they've tutored once or twice and they have their commander on board, those are the turns where you're like, you know what? I have this bounce spell in my hand and I'm going to make sure I have the mana to use it. I don't know if it'll stop what's coming, but it can interrupt something.
Yeah. And I think it's important to also be like, okay, I have 3 pieces of interaction, to not be like, let me hold up all 3. Sometimes it's just about like, I still have to develop my board and you have to weigh the benefits and the downsides of like, okay, if I don't play this creature now, it's still going to be something sick next turn when I do play it. And I have to have like, let's say this Mother of Runes online for my plane to succeed. Okay, I'm going to focus on playing that and leave more mana open for interaction instead of playing the big 5-drop that doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to feel out, but if a player has just drawn a bunch of cards, if they've tutored, if they've played a big setup piece, if they have their commander on board, if they're close to the estimated plan that you saw in your head at the beginning of the game, where you're like, okay, I imagine this deck is going to make a ton of mana, cast a big burn spell, and that's how I'm going to die. If they have all of the pieces to do those things, time to start holding up interaction.
Yeah. Another big time clue is if someone just goes very quiet, like a wascally wabbit. Like,
Not
why did
me.
they just go into the tank all of a sudden?
Not me.
They're just staring at their cards, and now it's
counting.
Are they? Yeah, are they counting? It's a great time to hold up some interaction. It's like, wait a minute, why are they pointing their finger at so many things right now?
Yeah,
They're just
something's
doing the
going
1, 5,
on.
7. They're just saying pi over there.
What's
happening?
everybody's life total?
Oh
at?
man, that question is hilarious. Don't ask that question, by the way, if you don't want to raise concerns.
No, just look.
Yeah, just look at the life counter.
Look at the life counts.
Yeah.
It's try to, if you're doing math, try to be sneaky about it.
Yeah, so anticipation is the big one for holding up interaction. Oftentimes, if you're just the deck that is interaction, you're always holding up mana, and hopefully you can just use the mana for other things if you don't use the interaction spells. But if you've just got that Teferi's Protection or the Heroic Intervention, knowing when to hold that up is super important. Like, don't just tap out for that extra 2-drop if you know that if something happens to your board, your game is over. So that's a big thing too, which is like, once your board state is built up to the point where if you don't hold up interaction and someone does something to it, you're screwed, then it's another point to be like, okay, I'm going to save that 3 mana every turn for Teferi's Protection or whatever it is.
For sure. Again, I would rather waste 3 mana than be dead.
Yeah.
All right. We've talked a lot about the threat. We've talked a lot about threat assessment. I want to sort of sum all of this up and talk about who is the threat in a more general way. Because we've talked about tons of questions. And it comes down to a few things. The first one being, of course, board state. What's going on on a person's board? How many cards do they have? How much mana do they have? How many creatures? How much power?
What is the openly available information that everyone can see?
Second thing, cards in hand. What are their secret resources? What do you not know about?
And have they been drawing a bunch this game? Have they been looting? How have they been crafting their hand? Have they tutored a bunch? Next up, player skill. So we talked about this at the very beginning, but again, who is the threat? Even when they're down, they seem down and out, they always find a way to pull it out. Or they're clearly just the more experienced player here. It's Reed Duke at the table. Don't just be nice to him because you're playing with Reed Duke type of situation.
He's going to be nice to you.
Yeah, he's going to be real nice to you as he destroys you with his player skill. Next up, deck matchup. Who's just got the Corvold that no matter what happens, they're just going to be able to rebuild and draw a ton of cards.
Yeah.
So if you don't get rid of them now, they're going to eventually outjund you.
Who's the board wipe deck when you're the creature deck? Keep an eye on it. The game narrative and dynamics. This is what we talked about, is like, what has literally happened in the game affected the players in this moment? There have been 3 board wipes. Clearly the creature deck is having a tough time, but the graveyard deck's looking okay, and the Spellslinger deck has 8 cards in their hand. Who has benefited?
A little bit less important, but life total. That person's at 70 life, and we're all at 20. Like, we should probably lower that life total down.
There is a time where that life total becomes a very real advantage.
Yeah.
They're just going to be harder to kill.
Yeah. And if you get into a 1v1 with them, you're really at a disadvantage, right? If you're at like 15 and they're like 5 times that. Sometimes political alliances, wow, that person has just escaped all damage done to them this entire game because they've managed to partner up really smartly. And as a result, they have better board state, more cards in hand. They're a better player, whatever it is, right? So understanding how those have played out. But that's a little bit tougher because, again, I found that most deals last a turn.
Right. Yeah. And finally, Josh Lee Kwai. Yeah.
Yep.
He's the threat.
He's the threat.
When in doubt.
However, he has not won many games of Game Nights recently because people
Because he's
have
always the threat. Yeah.
over-identified him as the threat. And I don't know how you get out of that pickle. And I wish the best for you, Josh. Because I win Game Nights games by going forth and having the most disadvantaged board the entire time and then somehow sneaking the win in the end. That's how it's happened for me multiple times
Aha! Roguelike. Finally.
Am I the threat? This is a good question to ask because sometimes if you're spending so much time asking if other people are the threat, but you're actually the threat, you just got to realize that.
Yeah. This is a very emotional topic. It's a tough thing when it's like, I'm trying to use all of the knowledge that I have in my hand, in my deck, in my matchup to make the best decisions that I can as a player. And sometimes people take that in a way that sometimes it's hurtful for like 3 of your friends to decide that you need to leave the game.
Yeah, because you're doing the thing too good.
And you have to sort of distance yourself from your individual self and put yourself in your planeswalker shoes and be like, oh yeah, I'm the baddie.
I kind of am the baddie. Not only am I playing Nicol Bolas, but I have completely locked down the table.
Because sometimes you don't feel like the baddie.
No, of course not. You're just doing your game. You're doing your fun things. You're
You're
playing
like, my deck's very fun. I'm very fun to play with.
I'm a cool, fun guy.
And they're like, yeah, but you will win if we don't kill you. And you're
Yeah.
like, so?
You're holding up 6 counterspells right now. That's not that fun for the rest of us. Yeah, I think understanding if the table's assessment is accurate, taking yourself out of your shoes and looking at it from a very unattached viewpoint to be like, oh, that does make sense that I have been threatening for these reasons.
And you should have a good idea of what your threat level is at the table, right? Like you should have an idea of when you're comfortable becoming the threat, when you're comfortable with the table turning against you, because it's going to happen. That's how you win the Commander game.
Yeah.
Is you gain the advantage that people will eventually recognize. So understanding how people are looking at you, how they're perceiving you in this moment in the game is going to help you win more games.
Yeah. And oftentimes denying yourself as the threat actually makes you more of a threat. Sometimes admitting to the fact that like, yeah, I've definitely got the strongest board state, you guys should try and take me down, will make them go like, all right, they know that, cool. Ooh, I should kill this other thing on the board first because they know that they're the threat. And also I think if you are the threat, it is very important that if things emerge that stop you from being the lead threat, that you accurately and carefully point them out, which is just like, hey, I was the threat before everyone, but Rachel has murdered me with these 3 things now, and I'm definitely knocked down a notch. Can you please pay attention to this?
Right.
Or this piece just came out that completely destroys my deck strategy. Until I get rid of that, I'm not the threat anymore, just so you all know. Right? So I think like being very plain about that and just honest can be a very, very effective tool because sometimes people just assume that everyone's going to try and protect what they're doing and hide or whatever. But being just openly transparent with what's happening can often be actually a way to victory as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and it's not one that I am particularly good at, it feels like, is recognizing that not everybody feels how you feel.
True.
And sometimes a thing that is a threat to you is not a threat to others. And you're like, well, obviously that's the threat. And it's like, is it?
Is it? It just
Is it
seems
to
like
them?
It's affecting you the
They're not
most.
playing your deck. They're not sitting in your chair.
A fun thing I like to do is if I'm down the most, I find the person that's the most threatening and I make them my ally.
Hi.
If you're the threat, you can also make the person that's at the most disadvantaged position your ally as well because they would like to partner up with the powerful cards. Okay. Threat assessment, I think the most important thing is just an awareness that we're trying to grow about it. It's a skill that the skill of discernment, the skill of knowing what is happening at the table and really accurately being able to describe it and to yourself and other players is something that grows over the course of playing the game. It's something that I was really bad at when I first started and I've only gotten better at because it's something I consciously practice.
You will start to recognize the cards that are threats when they hit the table after you've died to them.
Yeah.
That's how you learn in this game is like, oh, I remember last time this card came down, I died to it.
Yeah, I died to it. And your deck's doing a very similar thing, and I feel like I'm going to die to it again.
And now I have experience that is going to teach me to assess in a different way.
Yeah.
So it just comes from experience and playing the game, but hopefully this has helped.
Yeah. Or sometimes you see something, it's like, oh, I thought that was a huge threat in all the other games I played against it, but I'm just kind of overrating it. And it's actually not that bad, and I miss other things as a result. So the tunnel vision is also a part of the growing awareness, is to take yourself out of the tunnel and to see the forest through the trees.
When in doubt, take a second, look around, ask questions. How many cards do you have in hand?
Yeah. Ask other players too. If there's a really smart player at the table, you can ask them like, what do you think? Am I correctly evaluating this? And oftentimes 3 heads are better than 1. Oftentimes not.
Yeah,
Actually, a lot of
sometimes
times
they'll
real
tell
bad.
you what they want to get rid of.
Yeah. And keep that in mind too, right? Other players are under no obligation to tell you the 100% truth. They can say 90% of the truth and hold the 10%, which is like, oh man, I really hope that they get rid of that because that unlocks this in my hand.
Gamer's gonna game.
Gamer's gonna game. But,
Whether they think they will or not.
Yeah. But I think for the most part, right, it's a game. People aren't doing things maliciously. They're doing so to try and up their advantage in winning the game. And as long as that's the case, then go out there and have some fun.
To the listeners, how do you determine if someone is the threat or not? Is there something we missed that we were talking about? It's a very complicated issue. Everybody reads the table a little bit differently. If you've got a tip or a question that you like to ask yourself, throw it in the comments. We'd be happy to hear it. And if you want to buy any Magic cards,
go to cardkingdom.com/command. We love Card Kingdom. They have Magic product, sealed product, singles, ranging in all sorts of different qualities from every single set. They got a huge warehouse, and they're just one of the most trusted retailers out there. So if you want to buy some Magic product, you can support the show while doing so by visiting cardkingdom.com/command. There's a reason they sponsor us and a bunch of other popular YouTube channels that we all love. Is because they are great. They have good customer service. They ship your products in one convenient package, so it arrives on your doorstep with that cute little packing peanut. Sometimes they include like extra tokens and other fun stuff as well. But the most important thing, I think, is you're supporting this show, helping us make more great content, and you're getting the cards that you were going to buy anyway and the ones that you need for your decks at cardkingdom.com/command.
while you're bookmarking that, bookmark ultrapro.com/command to pick up all of the sleeves and deck boxes, binders, playmats, everything you need to be a well-accessorized Magic player. They release a new line of product every time a new set comes out. Now more and more in those Apex sleeves are the best. There is a MagicCon coming up, and we always recommend you picking up the Mana 8 playmat for those MagicCons because they're white and they have a lot of space to get like drawn on by artists or to get signed by your favorite creators or to have like your friends that you played against sign, I've seen, which is really cool. And it's a great like memento to take home from one of those events. Plus, they look really sharp and they're going to keep your cards in great condition. So if you're a green player, a red player, a white player, pick up the one that matches your vibe and bring it to MagicCon. We want to see you there. Again, we're doing game nights live on Friday, February 21st. It's at 6 p.m., so it's later than usual, and it's in a separate theater. We're not on the main floor anymore. We've grown into a big space, so you'll have nice comfy chairs so you can sit down and enjoy the show. It's going to be a ton of fun.
All the details about the address and the venue we'll post again on our Twitter as it gets closer, as well as mentioned in the podcast episode or have it in the show notes when we get those details. They're not fully ironed out yet.
Make sure you have a weekend or a Friday badge and you can come see that show. No additional ticket at the door.
All right, that's Game Nights Live. Make sure you get those tickets as well if you're planning on going. I think Chicago last year was one of the biggest ones ever, and I believe it did sell out. So if you know you're going to try and go, make sure you get that badge because that is the way you're going to be able to see the show. All right, big thanks to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. We have Rachel Kendra, Karina Cruz, Sebastian Salazar, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Brock, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Eric Lem, Josh Murphy, Manson Lung, Christopher Matissa, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, and the perennial threat, Josh Lee Kawhi.
He's a threat. Kill him.
Kill him.
Remove all his stuff.
Yeah, not us, not me or
us,
Rachel.
Not us.
Definitely
We're cute.
him. Ding. All right, everyone, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We're cute.